The war ended without celebration. Earth did not win. Earth survived. Cities still burned in places where the sky had once been blue. Millions of humans lived under broken domes, staring at stars they no longer trusted. The galactic war had shown the universe something dangerous about humanity. They did not kneel easily, even when they were outmatched. That made the alien empires afraid. So when the Valari Dominion arrived above Earth, their ships shining like cold moons, people expected judgment. Some feared extinction. Others feared slavery. What they offered instead was worse. Peace at a price. The Valari were ancient, powerful, and ruled half the known galaxy. They believed wars never truly ended unless bloodlines were bound together. Treaties failed. Promises broke. But marriage, to them, was sacred and permanent. One human would be chosen. One life traded for the safety of billions. The human councils argued for days. No one volunteered. Soldiers had fought enough. Politicians hid behind speeches. Families cried and prayed that the choice would fall on someone else. Commander Elias Kane listened in silence. Elias was not a hero in the public eye. He was a logistics officer during the war, moving people, evacuating civilians, keeping supply routes alive while others chased glory. His hands were not famous for killing, but for pulling people from rubble. He had lost his wife and young daughter when a Valari cruiser fell from orbit and crushed an evacuation zone. Since that day, Elias slept lightly and spoke little. Earth felt empty to him when the council announced the final decision would be made by lottery. Elias stood up. "I'll go," he said. The room froze. Men and women stared at him as if he had spoken a foreign language. The council leader asked him to repeat himself. "I volunteer," Elias said again. "If one human life ends the war forever, take mine." They tried to stop him. They spoke of honor, of sacrifice being unnecessary, of alternatives that did not exist. But Elias had already made his choice. He was tired of counting the dead. 3 days later, Elias left Earth aboard a Valari diplomatic vessel. He stood at the viewing window as his planet shrank into the distant, scarred, wounded, but alive. "I hope this is enough," he whispered. The Valari homeworld was nothing like Earth. Its sky shimmered in colors Elias did not have words for. Towers of crystal and metal grew like living things, glowing softly as if they breathed. The air was warm and carried a faint musical hum. He felt small there, human, fragile, escorted by silent guards. Elias was led through endless halls toward the royal chamber. His heart beat hard in his chest. He imagined meeting an alien noblewoman, someone important but distant, someone who would tolerate him as a symbol. He prepared himself for cold. Eyes and formal words. The doors opened. Light flooded the hall. Rows of alien nobles stood on either side, tall and elegant, their eyes glowing faintly. As Elias stepped forward, something unexpected happened. They bowed, every single one of them. A low murmur passed through the hall as a figure approached from the far end. She was taller than Elias, her skin silver blue like moonlight on water. Her eyes held the depth of centuries. A crown of living crystal rested upon her head. She did not smile. She looked at Elias with a mixture of curiosity and sadness. The translator in his ear activated, its voice trembling. "Commander Elias Kane of Earth, you stand before Queen Asha Velarin, sovereign of the Valari Dominion." Elias felt the ground tilt beneath his feet. A queen dot. Not a noble, not a diplomat, a ruler of half the galaxy. His throat went dry. "There's been a mistake," he whispered. Queen Usha stepped closer. Her voice was calm, controlled, and heavy with meaning. "There is no mistake," she said. "You were chosen for me." Elias looked around at the bowed court, at the power surrounding him, and felt fear sink deep into his bones. They had not given him an alien bride, they had given him a queen, and in that moment, Elias understood something terrifying. This marriage was not just about peace, it was about fate, and neither of them had been given a choice. The ceremony was unlike anything Elias had imagined. There were no drums, no cheering crowds, no colorful banners waving in the wind. The Valari did not celebrate weddings the way humans did. The air was filled with soft light, drifting in slow, glowing waves, like the memory of a star. The hall was enormous, stretching higher than any building Elias had seen on Earth. Floating pillars of crystal reflected every movement, every heartbeat, making him feel small, almost invisible. Queen Usha stood at the center, tall and unyielding, her crown catching the soft light and scattering it into the room. Her silver blue skin shimmered, and her eyes glowed faintly, a color that seemed alive. Elias swallowed, feeling the weight of every gaze upon him. He realized something, then he was not just meeting a bride. He was stepping into a world that belonged to someone else entirely. The Valari priest began the ritual. His words flowed in a language Elias could not understand. Strange sounds rolled like water over stones, soft and powerful at the same time. A translator whispered the meaning in his ear, but even the words could not take away the strange, suffocating awe he felt. He repeated the phrases, clumsy and human, while Usha's voice was soft, precise, perfect. When the ritual ended, the hall remained silent. Not a sound broke the air except the soft hum of the crystals. Elias could feel the eyes of the court boring into him, measuring him, testing him. He felt exposed, weak, human. Usha finally turned to him, her glowing eyes holding a curiosity that felt almost like empathy. She spoke slowly, words calm and measured. "You did not know you would stand before a queen," she said. "We did not tell you because it is not your burden to carry. It is mine." Elias could not speak. He only nodded. His heart was beating so fast that he could hear it even through the translator. I thought I was. I thought she would be a noblewoman, someone ordinary." He stopped, the words meaningless in the presence of her power. "She is not ordinary," Usha replied. There was no pride in her tone, only truth. "I am the ruler of this dominion. Every choice I make is for the lives of millions, not for myself. Yet now you are part of that choice." Elias laughed, bitter and low. It sounded strange to him in that foreign hall. "I failed to save my own," he said quietly, voice barely audible. "And now I am supposed to protect the entire galaxy by standing beside someone I barely know." Usha tilted her head slightly, studying him, as if reading the thoughts in his mind. For the first time, her expression softened just a little. "You do not yet understand," she said. "This is not about power. It is about restraint, about balance, and about the courage to be human even when surrounded by immortality." The chamber was vast, and yet in that silence, Elias felt smaller than ever. The human in him wanted to run back to the stars he knew, to the ruined cities of Earth where the pain was familiar. But he could not. Not now. not when the life of a queen and the fragile peace of the galaxy hung on his presence. That night, Elias and Asha were left alone in the private chamber prepared for them. It was vast, with floating lights like stars suspended in the air. 2 beds were placed far apart. He sat on the edge of his, trying to process what had happened. Asha stood by the window, silent, gazing at the alien sky outside. "I do not sleep easily," he said, breaking the quiet, though he did not know why he spoke. "I do not sleep at all," she replied. Her voice carried no judgment, only honesty. "I have never had a companion who did not fear me. Perhaps you are different." Elias chuckled softly, a sound full of pain. "I'm not different. I'm just broken." For a long time, neither spoke. The room was filled with silence and the faint music of the floating lights. But that night, both of them stayed awake, each lost in their thoughts. Elias wondered what it meant to be chosen. Asha wondered if a human could truly understand her life, and neither could deny the spark of curiosity, the fragile thread that began to tie their fates together. By the time the artificial dawn lit the chamber, Elias realized one thing clearly. This marriage was not about comfort or love. It was about survival. And if he wanted to survive not just for himself, but for the galaxy, he would need to learn not only to stand beside a queen, but to see her as a person, not a crown. Life in the Valari Palace was a trial from the moment Elias stepped inside. The court watched him constantly. Every movement he made, every word he spoke, was measured, judged, and compared to what the nobles expected of someone who dared to marry a queen. Some sneered openly, their glowing eyes cold with disbelief. Others whispered behind their hands, laughter soft and cutting. They called him the weak king, a human unworthy to stand beside a ruler. They thought he was a fool, or worse, a spy sent to steal secrets, or a pawn meant to fail. Elias felt the weight of their scorn like a physical force pressing against his chest. Each day he moved carefully, learning the subtle rules of their society. He had survived war, famine, and loss, but navigating the Valari court tested him in ways he had never imagined. Every misstep could be his death, or worse, the failure of a peace he had vowed to protect. The first test came quietly. A cup of water placed before him in the dining hall was laced with a sedative. Had he drunk it, he might never have woken up, but instinct told him something was wrong. Elias set the cup aside. The court whispered. The noble responsible flushed with anger, but no one dared accuse him openly. He was only a human. His survival depended on restraint, not confrontation. "I do not fight in their way," he said later to Asha as they walked through the palace gardens. "I cannot win their respect with swords or shields. I can only survive, and hope they understand why I stand beside you." Usha's eyes followed him. She moved silently beside him, her presence commanding yet strangely gentle. "That is exactly why you are different," she said. "Humans fight for survival, but you fight for life, not victory. That distinction makes you dangerous in ways they do not understand." Elias wanted to laugh, but the tension in his chest made it impossible. He was tired of being tested, tired of being measured, tired of pretending he belonged in a world built for beings who could live 1,000 years. And yet he could not turn away. Every step he took beside the queen reminded him of the price he had volunteered to pay. Another test came in the form of ridicule. During a council meeting, a Valari noble openly mocked him, questioning his worthiness to sit beside a queen who controlled the fate of countless worlds. Elias could have lashed out, but instead he bowed his head politely, his voice calm. "I am honored to serve." The noble's smirk faltered. The court murmured. They did not know how to respond to a human who did not fight back in anger. Elias realized then that his greatest weapon was not strength or skill, it was restraint, patience, and humility. Queen Usha watched each encounter with quiet attention. She saw the court's confusion at Ilias's behavior, and a small, rare smile touched her lips. She had ruled for centuries, and she had never seen someone survive her court so entirely by refusing to be what they expected. "You are not afraid," she said softly one evening as they walked through the palace corridors. Her hand brushed against his, almost accidentally. "And yet you are human. You should tremble before them." "I have trembled," Elias admitted, "every day. But I cannot show it. Not when so much depends on me." For the first time, Usha allowed herself to feel a flicker of admiration. Something she had not known she could feel for a human. The rest of the court would never understand, and perhaps they would never forgive him. But Elias had begun to prove something important, that humanity, though fragile, had a strength they could not predict. It was not brute force. It was not cunning. It was courage in the face of overwhelming odds. It was the choice to protect life when violence would have been easier. Yet peace was fragile. Rumors began to swirl, factions within the court whispered of rebellion. They would overthrow the queen and blame the human. Earth, Elias knew, would pay the price. The thought burned in his chest like fire. He could not allow that to happen. Not now. Not ever. And so, every day, he practiced patience. Every glance, every gesture, every word was calculated not to impress, but to survive, to learn, to prove that a human could stand beside a queen, not as a pawn, but as a partner. As the days passed, Elias and Usha spent more time together. She began to teach him the subtle ways of Valari culture, how to bow without submission, how to speak without offense, and how to move through halls that seemed to judge every heartbeat. And he, in return, shared stories of earth, of oceans, of cities rising from ruins, and of people who lived and loved even when everything was lost. In that strange exchange, something fragile began to grow: mutual respect, a seed of trust, and beneath that, though neither admitted it yet, a spark that neither time nor court intrigue could extinguish. The court tested him every day, but Elias Kane was learning to survive, not by power, but by humanity, and, in that, he was already beginning to win. The Star Convergence Festival was supposed to be a celebration. Valari. Citizens from across the Dominion gathered in the palace square, their glowing eyes reflecting light from the twin moons above. The air buzzed with music-like vibrations, a hum that felt alive, as if the entire city pulsed with energy. For Elias, it should have been beautiful. For centuries, the festival had marked peace, prosperity, and the unity of the Dominion. But Elias sensed danger before it arrived. The court whispers he had heard for weeks had grown sharper, more urgent. Rebels in the palace, plotting to overthrow Queen Usha, had waited for this night. Their opportunity was perfect crowds, distraction, and the vulnerable human at her side. Elias did not hesitate. He walked beside Usha through the hallways, his human body feeling painfully mortal against her elegance and strength. "They will strike tonight," he whispered, low enough for only her to hear. "I can feel it. We must be ready." Usha's hand brushed his, almost instinctively. Her eyes, glowing faintly, searched his. "And if we fail?" she asked quietly, voice steady but laced with fear she rarely allowed herself to show. Elias did not answer. He could not promise safety, not to her, not to anyone. All he could do was act. The first explosion came without warning. Crystal pillars shattered, throwing shards like knives into the crowd. Panic erupted. Nobles screamed, soldiers drew weapons, and the human part of Elias's mind screamed to run. But he did not. Usha froze for a moment, her eyes wide, but Elias's hand found hers. "Move," he said firmly, pulling her toward the private corridors only they knew. The corridors themselves became a battlefield. Rebel soldiers, armed with energy blades and grav pistols, blocked their way. Elias felt fear clawing at his chest, but he did not falter. Every human instinct screamed to survive. Every lesson from Earth, every mission he had ever commanded, came alive in him now. He shielded Usha with his body, taking the brunt of the first strike. Pain tore through his side, and blood began to soak his tunic, but he held her close. "Keep moving," he shouted, teeth gritted. Usha stared at him, eyes wide with disbelief. Not feared his belief. "You cannot," she began, but he cut her off. "I will not let you die," he roared. They pressed on through winding corridors, dodging blasts, leaping over fallen guards. The palace, once a symbol of calm and control, had become a war. Elias felt every step as though the floor itself might betray him. Finally, they reached the chamber where the rebellion's leader awaited, a Valari noble whose ambition had twisted his mind. The figure raised his weapon, aiming directly at the queen. Elias made a decision that would define him forever. He threw himself between Usha and the blade. Pain exploded through his chest as energy slammed into him. He fell to the floor, hearing the sickening sound of ribs cracking, blood filling his lungs. Yet he held her, his arms wrapped around her like chains, his human fragility becoming a shield stronger than any armor. Usha screamed, but her scream quickly turned to controlled fury. She struck the noble with a precision so fast it seemed the air itself had moved, ending the threat instantly. The remaining rebels hesitated, then fled. Silence fell. The chamber was filled with smoke and blood. Guards hurried to secure the area. And there, on the cold crystal floor, lay a human, broken, bleeding, yet holding the life of a queen in his arms. Usha knelt beside him, her glowing eyes filled with emotions she had rarely shown to anyone. "Elias," she whispered, her voice trembling, "you should not have done this." He coughed, trying to speak through pain. "I couldn't. Let them." She placed her hand over his heart. "You are stronger than anyone here realizes." For the first time, she realized the truth of what humans were capable of, not brute strength, not power, not immortality, but courage, sacrifice, the willingness to protect another even when survival itself seemed impossible. In that moment, the court witnessed something they could never understand. A human had risked everything, not for glory or power, but for someone he barely knew. Ilias's body was broken, but his choice had made him more than a symbol. He had become proof that humanity could stand beside God's hand, perhaps even teach them what true courage meant. And Queen Usha, who had ruled centuries without ever feeling fear for her own life, felt something new, gratitude, awe, and something deeper, something fragile but unmistakable stirring in her chest. She knew then that this human, so fragile, so ordinary by the universe's standards, was no pawn. He was her equal in ways the stars themselves might never measure. The palace was quiet, almost unbearably so after the attack. The halls were filled with whispers, the soft hum of healing fields, and the distant clatter of soldiers repairing damage. But in the private chamber where Elias lay, the world seemed to have stopped. His body was broken, ribs cracked, breathing shallow and labored. Blood had soaked through bandages, yet his hands still rested protectively on the space where Queen Asha had been. Asha entered the room quietly. Her eyes glowed softly, filled with something that startled even her some things human. She knelt beside him, letting the weight of her presence press down not as a ruler, but as someone who cared. "I did not know a human could do this," she whispered, her voice trembling despite centuries of practice in controlling her emotions. She reached out, her fingers brushing his cheek, silver blue skin against human warmth. "You could have died, and yet you chose me. For me, for life." Elias tried to speak, but the words caught in his throat. Pain, exhaustion, and disbelief battled inside him. "It was my choice," he managed, voice ragged. I could not let them harm you. Not when I could stop it." Usher's eyes filled with tears, something she had not allowed herself in centuries. For the first time in Valari history, a queen wept openly, kneeling beside someone who was not her equal by law, not by rank, but by something far more meaningful: courage. The court learned of Elias's actions soon after. The nobles who had mocked him, called him weak, whispered and hesitated. Reports spread of the human who had run toward danger when every instinct told him to run. He had shielded their queen, had protected her life with his own body, and the Dominion could not deny it. Asha called a council meeting, unprecedented in formality. For centuries, the Valari had followed strict hierarchy. The queen ruled, the council obeyed. But Asha did something no Valari queen had ever done. She knelt before the court not as a gesture of subservience, but as proof of her declaration. "This human," she said, voice steady and commanding, "has risked everything for me. Not for glory, not for power, not for himself. He has chosen to protect life, even at the cost of his own. He is my equal. He is my partner, and I will not allow anyone here to forget it." Whispers erupted, but Asha silenced them with a wave of her hand. The court understood that her words were not a suggestion, they were law, her voice absolute. The rebels who had plotted to overthrow her were exposed, their schemes crushed, but something deeper had shifted. The human beside her was no longer merely a symbol. He had earned respect that centuries of tradition could not have given him. Elias lay in the chamber, barely able to sit, still healing from the injuries that would leave marks on his body for the rest of his life. And yet, when Asha knelt beside him, he felt something he had not in years: hope, trust, and perhaps, if he allowed himself to believe it, a fragile spark of love. "Do you understand now?" Asha asked softly, her fingers brushing his hand. "You are not weak. You are more powerful than anyone here knows, because your courage comes from choice, not obligation. You are human, and that is why you matter." Elias closed his eyes briefly, feeling the weight of her words settle in his chest. He had come to the Valari not knowing what to expect, not knowing the truth of what he would face. He had volunteered to be a symbol of peace, expecting to be invisible. Instead, he had become indispensable, not because he commanded armies, or because he wielded weapons, but because he had acted when others hesitated, for the first time. He saw Usha not as a queen whose crown cast shadows over him, but as a woman who had never been allowed to choose her heart, and in that moment their bond began to change. Respect gave way to trust. Trust gave way to something quieter, yet far stronger in understanding that neither of them had anticipated. They spent hours in the chamber after that. Words were few. The healing lights hummed softly. Ilias's hand stayed close to hers, and Usha no longer felt the weight of her crown pressing down. In that quiet, fractured room, the queen and her human found a fragile piece of their own. The court would come to see Elias as a hero. The Dominion would remember him as the human who saved the queen. But for Usha, he was more than a hero. He was the first person in centuries who had looked at her not with fear, not with ambition, but with choice and courage. And for Elias, he realized something he had not expected. He had found not only a reason to survive, but someone worth standing beside for the rest of his life. The palace felt different after the attack. The halls, once tense with suspicion and whispers, now carried a quiet respect whenever Elias walked through them. The nobles no longer mocked him openly. They did not bow in fear or derision. Instead, they gave him space of fragile acknowledgement that the human who had risked his life for the queen had earned something more than mere survival. And in that change, Elias felt something stir inside him. Pride, yes, but also a strange, new feeling he could not name. Queen Usha's presence beside him was no longer intimidating. Her silver blue skin glowed softly in the corridors, her crown catching light in a way that made her seem untouchable. Yet, when she spoke to him quietly, her voice carried warmth rather than command. They began to spend long hours together, in quiet rooms where the court could not watch, in gardens that shimmered with floating lights. She taught him the subtle ways of Valari society, how to move without offense, how to speak with care, how to read the unspoken currents in every glance and gesture. And Elias taught her something too. He told her of Earth's oceans, of sunsets that set the sky on fire, of rain falling on city streets after a long war. He spoke of music humans made, of laughter that survived loss, of courage found in ordinary people. Usha listened, fascinated. The stories were simple, but they held a kind of power she had never known. They reminded her that life could exist beyond crowns, beyond duties, beyond centuries of expectation. One evening, as the twin moons cast silver light over the palace gardens, Elias and Usha sat on a quiet terrace. The hum of the city beneath them was soft, almost musical. Elias looked at her, hesitating, searching for words that felt human and true. "You have changed me," he said quietly. "I came here thinking I would only be a symbol, a pawn to save lives. I never thought I could feel like this, like maybe I could matter to someone truly." Usha's eyes glimmered in the moonlight, and she leaned closer. "You already matter," she whispered, "more than anyone in this court can ever understand, not because of what you did that night, but because of who you are. You see people, Elias. You see life. That is something even we who live centuries often forget." They fell into a silence that was neither awkward nor empty. It was filled with understanding, with shared grief, with the beginnings of trust and something more, something fragile yet undeniable. Elias reached for her hand. She did not pull away. Their fingers intertwined, human and alien. A simple connection that carried more weight than crowns or thrones. Weeks passed, and the connection deepened. The court continued to observe, though now with caution instead of scorn. They could not understand the bond forming between a queen and a human, but neither could stop it. Asha began to laugh more often, a sound Elias had not expected to hear, a sound that made the palace feel alive again. And Elias, he found a peace he had not known in years. One day, the council demanded that Elias accept command authority over certain sectors of the Dominion, a position of power they thought he could not refuse, but he declined. She does not need a king, he told them firmly. She needs a partner, and I will stand beside her, not above her. That is all the authority I claim. The court murmured, shocked by his audacity. But Asha smiled. That simple act refusing power, not out of fear but out of respect, sealed the trust between them. They were equals now, not by law, not by tradition, but by choice. In the months that followed, Elias and Asha became inseparable. They dined together, walked together, and spent hours simply talking. Their laughter echoed through the palace corridors. When danger arose, rebels, political schemes, disputes, their partnership was unshakable. Elias acted with courage, Asha with precision. Together, they were not just ruler and symbol, they were a team. And slowly, quietly, love grew. Not a sudden, blinding passion, but a steady, enduring bond forged in shared fear, shared hope, and shared humanity. Asha discovered that she could trust him with more than life, she could trust him with her heart. Elias realized that he could love a queen not for her power, but for the woman beneath the crown, whose strength had always been matched by her vulnerability. One night, as the palace lights dimmed and the moons shone silver over the gardens, Asha turned to Elias and whispered, I choose you, not because the law demands it, not because tradition says I must, but because my heart does. Elias felt a warmth in his chest he had thought he lost forever. And I choose you, he said, voice steady. Always. In that quiet garden, under alien stars and twin moons, a human and a queen stood together, not as ruler and subject, not as hero and symbol, but as equals, as partners, as something the galaxy had never expected and, yet desperately needed. The Valari court, the Dominion, the stars themselves could watch. Humanity had shown its greatest strength not in weapons, not in battles, but in the courage to love and the courage to stand beside someone with your life, your heart, and your choices. And in that moment, Elias and Asha knew that nothing could ever break the bond they had forged.